Good afternoon, folks. Robert Chappell, Executive Editor, Madison365, with your daily update for Monday, November 15th. The news is not good today, I'm afraid, but one thing we do have to tell you before we get going here, it is, as you know, Metcalf's Monday, which means that we got to talk about Metcalf's Markets, which is a fourth generation, family owned and operated market with stores in Madison at Hilldale Mall and behind Westtown Mall, and in Wauwatosa at 68th and State. Right now, it is that time of year. They are stocked with everything you'll need for an amazing Thanksgiving meal: turkey, all the sides, and don't forget the pies. You can order for pickup or delivery anytime at shopmetcalfs.com, which, frankly, you might want to do just because it's rough out there with the whole COVID thing happening still. The numbers are just not good today. There's one number in particular that's very bad. The others are not quite so bad. So basically what I'm seeing here, just this is broad level, that the some measures of epidemiology are very bad, but the consequences of those numbers are not as bad as they were at this time last year. Does that make sense? So what we're seeing is very high positive test rate, very high number of cases, but the deaths and the hospitalizations are not quite at the same level as they were last year. So in a way, that's like the news right now is not as bad as it could be. Okay, so let's talk through these numbers real quick. Right now we are at 2,862 new cases per day in the past 7 days. That includes 1,293 cases today. Mondays are typically lower. There's not as much testing or reporting happening over the weekends. That is up from the last time we talked on Friday. That was 2,788. So about 100 more than it was on Friday. Okay, for the 7-day average of new cases. 7-day positive test rate. That's all the tests in the past 7 days. By the way, we're doing about 30,000 tests per day statewide. So it's not like there's no testing or very little testing. Obviously, this number tells us we could probably use some more testing, right? But it's not like the testing has gone away. But 10.8% of all the tests in the past 7 days have come back positive. Now, that might be that there's some negative test, there's some batch of negative tests that hasn't been entered into the data yet. So this number might get revised down. It might also get revised up, frankly. The trajectory of this number has been just almost straight up. Late last week, it was 10.5, 10.7 on Friday. Actually, you know what? On Friday, when I reported on Friday, it was 10.0. And that number has now been revised upward. And now they're saying that even on Friday, which initially was reported at 10.0, it was 10.7. So I wouldn't be surprised if the real number today is actually like 11 or 11.5, which is terrible. The highest we've ever been in the state of Wisconsin was back on November 12th of last year, was 17.5. Okay. 10.8 is very bad. 3 is where we want to be. You want to be doing enough testing such that even with a high number of cases, you're only at about 3% positive test rate. We're not there right now, obviously. Now, the news that's not as terrible, the new reported deaths. Now, at this time last year, we were doing like 50 or 60 deaths a day. Today we're doing 14. That's 14 too many, right? Only 2 confirmed yesterday, which is typical for a weekend, right? We'll probably get 20 or 30 confirmed tomorrow, but that won't push our daily death average up to where it was this time last year. There could be several reasons for this. Therapies have gotten better. Vaccinations are higher. So some of these, we'll talk in a minute about vaccinations, but some small number of these positive tests are vaccinated people who are just not very likely to die from this, right? Also, we're seeing more of the cases in younger people who are less likely to die. but who can still be hospitalized and have significant long-term effects, right? But overall, if you look at just the sort of bottom line numbers, we are right now we're seeing lower than 1% of positive cases leading to death in Wisconsin, at least in this period of time, which is, if you're looking for one sliver of good news, that could be it. Now, hospitalizations are also up, although not as high as they were last year at this time. We are at over 1,100 now, again, 1,127 currently hospitalized. That's like a 13% increase in the past 7 days. Not great. 315 of those people are in ICUs, which is a similar increase, about a 12% increase in the past 7 days. So that's not great either. The ICU capacity has improved slightly since Friday. As of Friday, we only had 70 ICU beds available. Now we have 91, so that's a little better, which means that a bunch of people who were in ICUs for reasons other than COVID have been discharged from those ICUs or have been moved out of those ICUs, right? Because the ICU population of COVID patients has gone up, but the overall statewide population of ICU patients has gone down slightly. So that's the basic numbers. I'm going to talk a little bit about illness after vaccination because it's the 15th of the month. Ever since August, the state has been releasing this monthly report on illness after vaccination as compared to illness among unvaccinated people, right? These are not raw numbers. These are rates. So there are slightly more vaccinated people in Wisconsin than unvaccinated. So it's not fair to compare raw numbers of vaccinated people versus unvaccinated people who get infected or hospitalized or die. So they do it as a rate. So of every 100,000 unvaccinated people in the state of Wisconsin, which is roughly a little under 2.5 million people in the state of Wisconsin remain unvaccinated. Okay, of every 100,000 of those in the month of October, 2,255 tested positive for COVID-19. Of every 100,000 vaccinated people, it was 456. So in other words, if you are unvaccinated, you are 5 times as likely to test positive. In September, that was 4 times. So the disparity between these things is getting wider as more people get vaccinated. Of all those, every 100,000 people who were not vaccinated, 132 were hospitalized because of COVID-19. We're not talking every 100,000 people who are infected. We're talking everybody in the state who is unvaccinated. 1 out of 1,000, roughly, a little more than 1 out of every 1,000 unvaccinated people landed in the hospital because of COVID-19. Of those who are vaccinated, out of every 100,000 vaccinated people, 12 were hospitalized for COVID-19 infection. In other words, if you're not vaccinated, you are almost 11 times more likely to land in the hospital. Of every 100,000, this doesn't look like the right number to me. Give me 1 second to double check this. Of every 100,000 people who are not vaccinated in the state of Wisconsin, I apologize. My number on my blurb was wrong because I didn't do a decimal point properly. It's suddenly looking at this, that looks a little bit on the high side. Out of every 100,000 people who are not vaccinated, 27.3 died of COVID-19. Out of every 100,000 people who are vaccinated, 1.8 died of COVID-19. So, which means you are about you're about 15 times more likely to die of COVID-19 if you are unvaccinated. Linda asks infection or illness. I think what you mean is, I'm not sure what you mean by infection versus illness. If you're talking about symptomatic versus asymptomatic, what they're counting is positive tests, which is technically a case, because you can be, there could be more infections than there are cases, because a lot of people are infected and never test positive because because either they don't have symptoms, then just don't get tested or whatever. So bottom line is, my blurb at the top of the Facebook thing was wrong. It was 15 times higher chance of death if you're unvaccinated, 11 times more likely to land in a hospital, 5 times more likely to get infected. So next time you hear somebody say, "Oh, if you get vaccinated, you can still catch it," yeah, you're 5 times as likely. You're 5 times more likely to test positive. This is kind of a yes, infection is what we're talking about. This is kind of a splitting hairs a little bit, but there are unmeasured infections, right? There are infections that never get counted. So really, if you want to be super precise about it, we're talking about cases. But in fact, you're right. Infection is what we're talking about here. We're not talking about symptomatic people necessarily. We're talking about people who test positive. All right. So that's the numbers. Get vaccinated. That's the moral of the story here. If you want to say that's 500%, you're 500% more likely to get infected if you're not vaccinated. I just don't know how that is difficult to understand. For folks who say, like, well, you can still get it if you're vaccinated. Yeah, sure. And you can still die in a car accident if you have your seatbelt on, but it's much less likely. Right? Yeah, it is an important distinction. It's an important distinction when you're talking about case fatality rate versus infection fatality rate. But again, infection, there are a lot of infections that aren't cases. So what we're talking about really is cases. But we're not talking about symptomatic versus not symptomatic is the point. Okay, so we're gonna take a short break, and we have some other news for you for just a few minutes. I got to hop off here pretty soon, but we got a couple more news stories to talk about right after this. Do not scroll away. All right, so a couple of things we want to run by real quick here. Go to Madison365.org for the latest news. As always, you know that. We've got some national news there as well as some local news. We're going to talk through a couple of local things just real quick to highlight for you. Freddie Martinez there on the left, there with 4 of his 7 children. We got a great feature on him this morning. He, 2010, found himself kind of suddenly in bankruptcy and a single father of 7. Could not afford to buy his kids furniture. He's working at Sub-Zero in Madison, but just could not afford furniture for all of his kids. So he started making his own furniture, which, I mean, how many of us would love to be able to say, like, yeah, I could just make some furniture. But he realized that, he's good at this. His dad worked in construction. So he's like, this kind of thing he can do. And started doing that and started to sell some pieces. Somebody wanted a coffee table made out of a whiskey barrel. And he thought he'd give it a try. And then when he did it, it took him like a year to figure out how to do it. And by then the person didn't want it anymore. So he just threw it up on Facebook and sold it immediately and realized he was onto something, created this whole new side business out of making these, what you're seeing here in the picture is a bar cart. You can see the little shelves there in the middle. If you go to the story at Madison365.org, there's one that's got like a fireplace in the middle of it. It's just fantastic. But he sells these things for relatively reasonable price because he's not trying to get rich on them. But it's a really interesting story of a guy just making the most out of his talents, and which is really cool. And Dave Dahmer has that story for us at Madison365.org. Also today, we've got 8 local organizations who have gotten awarded grants to improve maternal health, which is a big problem in the state of Wisconsin. Black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. It's a terrible epidemic type problem. And what you're seeing here is the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness, one of the recipients of these grants that came from the UNW School of Medicine and Public Health's Wisconsin Partnership Program. $1.2 million in grants to 8 different organizations: the African American Breastfeeding Network, Foundation for Black Women's Wellness in Madison, Today Not Tomorrow Inc., it's also Madison-based, Expo, Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing, Rock County Health Department, Fathers Making Progress, Next Door Foundation, and the City of Milwaukee Birth Outcomes Made Better doula program. Also today in the news, we learned that State Representative David Bowen, also a former Milwaukee County board member, has thrown his hat into the ring to be Wisconsin's next lieutenant governor. Manila Barnes, the current lieutenant governor, running for United States Senate. So running to replace him on the Democratic side in the primary are David Bowen and State Senator Lena Taylor and State Representative Sarah Rodriguez, along with, I think, 4 Republicans on the other side. So that's the news we have for you today. Once again, join the FAM. If you join the FAM, our monthly donation program, you get a few perks from us, and your entire year-long commitment is matched by the News Match program, so it doubles your impact, right? You join us for $5 a month. You go to Madison365.org/thefam, and you sign up for $5 a month. That's basically you're committing to give us $60 over the course of the year. Newsmatch gives us all 60, matches that, doubles it, gives us $60 right up front, no questions asked. So doubles your impact. You get to feel some ownership over what we do. You see a story from Madison 365 float through your Facebook feed. You say, hey, I helped make that happen. And it feels good. So give it a try. Stop by there, Madison365.org/thefam when you can. Thanks very much for joining us today. We will be back tomorrow. We'll have the It's Only 10 Minutes podcast in the morning. And then I'll be back tomorrow with hopefully some better COVID numbers for you between now and then. Have a great evening. We'll talk to you soon.
This is 365 Media.